Opinions and policies about public education in America reach back to the 17th century. Education in the American colonies began as a religious endeavor. In the 17th century, New England's Puritan settlers stressed that everyone learn how to read the Bible. Puritan leaders began enforcing this. Puritan clergy were initially responsible for teaching. However, an early Puritan directive removed education responsibilities from the hands of the clergy and required that parents teach their children how to read and write. This method did not work effectively, and as a result, the Puritan community began implementing new laws that required each town to fund and operate a local school and ordered every township to appoint one person to teach children to read and write. In reality, many New England towns failed to establish such schools. Moreover, the schools that were founded tended to focus on producing an educated elite class and not on educating the entire public. In colonial America, public education was first and foremost a means to educate an elitist class of future political and business leaders. Education for commoners was largely left to families and churches. The years following America's independence from Britain did little to change the American public education system. Education remained a responsibility of individual families and local communities, not a duty of state or federal governments. During this time, George Washington saw the importance of educating the American public as a means to grow the country economically and also to create a well-informed populace to participate in America's newly founded democracy. However, public opinion did not support a government-backed education system. Despite Congress's failure to institute meaningful education reform following the Revolutionary War, a few American leaders began voicing support for a more extensive and structured public education system. One of the loudest voices was Thomas Jefferson. Jefferson argued that democracy required all the citizens of a populace to have sufficient education so that they could be well informed and vote accordingly. Jefferson did not, however, want to infringe on the rights of parents or local communities to educate their children. Jefferson's plans for more centralized education fell through because Americans still favored private education ventures and local control of the education system. Very few Americans wanted there to be government oversight of elementary and high school level education. The 19th century is often referred to as the Common School period because American education transitions from an entirely private endeavor to public availability. In the early 19th century, the United States had the world's highest literacy rate, even though it lacked an official public education system. Informal means of education such as apprenticeships, charity schools, and church schools help fill in the gaps created by the absence of public schools. During this period, many schools required prospective students to already know how to read and write. This kept children whose parents did not educate them at home out of the school education system. After the War of 1812, the American public began to take greater notice of the country's inconsistent and unreliable education system. The 1820s and 1830s were a time of great urban population growth, and many urban centers doubled their population. Much of the population growth was the cause of increased immigration into the United States. Higher rates of immigration increased interest and pressure to establish public schools. Famed educator Calvin Stowe advised that unless we educate our immigrants, they will be our ruin. It is no longer a question of benevolence, of duty, or of enlightened self-interest. We are prompted to it by the instinct of self-preservation. Even though many early to mid-19th century citizens advocated for public schools, the idea of government-funded schooling still garnered harsh reaction among others. Taxpayers who opposed public education worried that public school system would result in higher taxes or that it would wrongly take money out of the pockets of the working class to fund education for the rich. Churches contended that public schools would fail to teach religion efficiently, especially as prejudice towards immigrants and Catholics grew in major urban areas. And private school teachers feared that they would face lower pay or even lose their jobs. It was not until the 1840s that a structured system of public education emerged in the United States. During this period, education reformers built schools on a state-by-state basis. These education pioneers promoted educational reform as a means to enhance the economic opportunities for all Americans and to create a shared bond amongst the citizens of a very diverse population. Common School supporters sought to found completely free elementary schools available to all American children. One of America's strongest advocates for public schools was Massachusetts native Horace Mann. As a state senator, Horace Mann lobbied feverishly for the creation of a state board of education. When the Massachusetts State Board of Education was created, Horace Mann left his seat in the Massachusetts Senate to become the secretary of the board. Throughout his tenure as Education Board Secretary, Horace Mann fought to secure tax funding for public schools and to keep religious education separate from public instruction. He also established Teacher Training College and lengthened the school year. Horace Mann's greatest achievement, however, was his role in kick-starting the Common School movement. During this period, the notion of having a standardized system of education caught on across New England. In 1852, Massachusetts went as far as to pass a compulsory attendance law. Similar laws would not be commonplace throughout the United States until the 20th century. Horace Mann introduced the notion of placing students in grades based on age and ability. He first instituted this idea, known as age grading, in 1848. Prior to 1848, elementary classrooms consisted of students ranging from as young as 6 to as old as 14 years old. When Horace Mann introduced age grading, large age disparities in the classrooms all but vanished. The system was a success because it allowed students to learn with their own age and gave them an opportunity to graduate to the next grade. This gave students something to work towards and a sense of accomplishment when they finished each grade. Horace Mann's reforms were generally met with widespread approval from the American people. He insisted that public education would turn America's children into responsible and civically minded citizens. Horace Mann's ideas won the support of moderners and members of the Whig Party. For this reason, each year he issued a report on public schooling to help drum up even more support for his cause. In Horace Mann's 10th annual report of the Secretary of the Massachusetts State Board of Education in 1846, he touts the glory of having a universal system of free education. Horace Mann starts his report declaring that the Pilgrim Fathers, amid all of their privations and dangers, conceived the magnificent idea not only of universal but of free education for the whole people. Two divine ideas filled their great hearts: their duty to God and society. For one, they built the church. For the other, they opened the school. Horace Mann reasoned that the next rational step for Massachusetts was to move past just providing the public education system that they had already created and to establish a common school system. The first public schools were government funded but were often divided along socio-economic lines. Horace Mann's idea of a common school was one that was open to all classes of Americans and would serve to break down class distinctions. Horace Mann argued that a system of common education was the best way to ensure social and national unity. From these roots, common public education in America was established.